If old age is a second youth, I certainly didn't get an invitation to this party. Every morning I wake up to the accompaniment of the crunching joints and sighing springs of my old bed. We're the same age as her, except she creaks and I lurch. My name is Ruth Thorndike. I'm 76 years old and I've lived in a two-story house on a quiet street in Prescott for over 40 years. The house, like me, is long overdue for repairs, but we're both too stubborn to admit it. The wallpaper in the living room is faded. The floorboards creak as if to alert me to my every move, but it's my home, my fortress. I worked as an accountant all my adult life until I retired 12 years ago. Numbers never lie. They either add up or they don't, unlike people, especially the ones you call family. It's Tuesday, which means Abigail and Noel are coming over tonight. My daughter and her husband come to see me twice a week, Tuesdays and Saturdays. It's the schedule they set 3 years ago when my husband Clive died. "We have to keep an eye on you, Mom," Abigail said then with a strained smile that never reached her eyes. I brush my gray hair in front of the bathroom mirror. The wrinkles on my face are a map of a life lived, some from laughter, some from tears, some from constant tension. Especially deep ones appeared after Abigail was born. A difficult labor, an even more difficult daughter. Abigail had always been a difficult child. At 3, she broke a porcelain figurine my mother had given me and didn't even apologize. At 12, she stole money from my wallet to buy a toy that was popular at the time. At 16, started dating a guy on a motorcycle just to spite Clive and me. Her whole life has been a continuous series of small and large selfish acts. Now 51, she works as a receptionist in a dental practice and her husband Noel is an insurance agent. They have no children. Too burdensome, Abigail once said, giving me a meaningful glance. I'm making dinner today. It's chicken and vegetable stew, Clive's favorite. I make it for 2, as is my habit, and put the second portion in the fridge. Tomorrow's lunch is ready. The doorbell rings at 6 o'clock sharp. Abigail is always punctual, the one trait she inherited from me. "Mom, how are you?" she asks as soon as she crosses the threshold. Her tone is as fake as the artificial flowers on my windowsill. "Still alive," I answer, letting them into the house. Noel nods at me, his eyes darting around the room, like he's assessing if there's anything new to pick up after I'm dead. Tall, with thinning hair, he always reminded me of a ferret just as skittish and cold-eyed. "It smells good," he said, sniffing. "I hope you haven't forgotten your diet, Ruth. Dr. Price was talking about your cholesterol." "What do you care about my cholesterol?" I replied, heading for the kitchen. "It's my heart. I don't care if it's bursting with fatty foods." "Mom!" Abigail exclaims in that tone you use when you're talking to a cranky child. "We're worried about your health." Worried about my money, I want to say, but I don't. Years have taught me that some thoughts are best kept to myself, especially when dealing with people like my daughter and her husband. We sit down at the table. Abigail scrutinizes the food before putting down her meager portion. She's always on some sort of diet. Noelle, on the other hand, pounces on the chicken with the enthusiasm of someone who is used to eating at the expense of others. "How are you doing, Mom? Taking your meds?" Abigail asks, picking at her plate. "I'm not a child, Abigail. I'm not a forgetful old lady. I know what pills to take and when to take them. It's just that Noel and I are worried. After you forgot to turn off the stove last month." "I didn't forget to turn off the stove," I interrupt. "I was making tomato sauce that was supposed to be simmering slowly. You were the one who barged in and turned it off, thinking I'd forgotten something." Abigail exchanges glances with her husband. This silent dialogue is all too familiar to me. "See, she's becoming unbearable," her eyes say. "Yes, we need to do something," Noel's gaze replies. "By the way, Mom, we've been thinking," Abigail begins, carefully blotting her lips with a napkin. "This house is too big for you alone, and the stairs. You're not going up them so fast anymore." "I'm still climbing," I cut him off. "And this house isn't too big. It's where all my memories live." "But it costs a lot of money to run a house like this," Noel said, his voice sounding like he was talking to a child. "Heating, roof repairs last year, a gardener." "I can afford it," I say. "Clive and I have been saving all our lives, and I'm not going to move into some shoebox to save on heating." "No one's talking about a shoebox, Mom." Abigail sighed. But there are great senior housing options. With 24-hour medical care, peer community, activities. Call things what they are, Abigail. You're talking about a nursing home. An active retirement community, Noelle corrected me with a strained smile. I've seen these communities. I paused for a sip of water. A group of old people playing bingo and complaining about their illnesses. No, thank you. But you're all alone here, Mom, Abigail insists. What if you fall? What if you get sick in the night? I have a phone and a panic button, I reply, pointing to the device on my wrist. And I'm not alone. Thursday, I play bridge with Pearl and Maud. Fridays, I go to book club. Abigail rolls her eyes the way she did when she was a teenager, when she thought my arguments were hopelessly outdated. A group of similarly aged people can hardly help in an emergency, Mom. Pearl, by the way, is a former nurse, I countered. She once saved a man in a supermarket when he was choking. And your father died of a heart attack when you were 2 feet away from him, if you remember. That's a low blow, and I know it. Clive did die of a heart attack 3 years ago, during a family dinner. Abigail was by his side, but panicked and failed to administer first aid. The paramedics who arrived said it was too late, but I know this situation still torments my daughter. Not because of the loss of her father, they were never close, but because of her own helplessness. Abigail's face reddened with anger or shame, perhaps both feelings at the same time. It was an emergency, Mom. No one was prepared. That's why I prefer to rely on myself and my friends rather than an active retirement community. Noel cleared his throat, clearly trying to change the subject. By the way, Ruth, I noticed the paint on the front of the building is starting to peel. Do you want me to find a good painter? Thanks, but I've already arranged for Mrs. Kowalski's son. He'll do it next month. But he's just moonlighting, Abigail exclaims. He's not even a professional painter. But he's cheap, and he knows I won't tolerate hack work. Dinner continues in the same vein. Every question they ask, every offer of help, is filled with ulterior motives. They don't ask about my well-being out of concern. They need to know how much longer I'll last. They don't offer to help around the house out of kindness. They need to monitor my possessions. After dessert, the apple pie I made in the morning, Abigail helps me with the dishes, and Noel inspects the house for problems. I know he's really just snooping around, assessing what he can sell after I die. Mom, Abigail begins when we're alone. Did you update your will after Daddy died? Here it is, the real reason for their visit. Not care, not concern for my well-being, money, always money. Yes, updated, I answered dryly. And no, I won't tell you what's in it. Mom, I was just asking for practical reasons. At your age, you have to think about these things. Oh, I think about them all the time, dear, I say with a smile that I know annoys her, especially when you and Noel come to visit. Abigail presses her lips together so hard that they turn into a thin line. She inherited this habit from her father, who also did this when he was unhappy. We're just worried about you, she says finally. You're getting difficult. I've always been difficult, Abigail. You just never had any reason to notice before. When they finally leave, I feel the relief that always comes after their visits. The house is mine again, the silence my companion. I sit down in my favorite chair by the window, the same one Clive used to sit in. I look at the picture on the mantelpiece of him and me, young and happy, holding the newborn Abigail. You always said she looked like you, I whisper to the photo, but you were never that calculating and cold. I think back to when Abigail broke my favorite vase as a child and didn't even apologize. How as a teenager she screamed that she hated us when we wouldn't let her sleep over at a friend's house. How she demanded to pay for her tuition at an expensive college and then dropped out after the first semester because it wasn't hers. And then there was Noel, a man with cold eyes and a fake smile. Clive immediately disliked him. He looks at our daughter as an investment, not as a woman to love, he told me after the first meeting. And he was right. They married quickly without much pomp. I don't think it was a marriage of love, more like a marriage of convenience. Two selfish men who found each other and decided that together they could achieve their goals more easily. I still remember the look on Abigail's face when Clive announced that he would only pay for half the wedding, not the whole thing as she had hoped. Disappointment and anger instantly replaced by fake gratitude. As the years passed, their visits became more and more infrequent and more obvious in their motives. They came only for the holidays, and each time the conversation inevitably turned to our finances, our health, our plans for the future. When Clive fell ill, Abigail visited him in the hospital exactly twice a week, no more and no less, as if she was doing her duty, not visiting her dying father. And when he died, she cried at the funeral so loud and so fake that I wanted to cover my ears. Then she started talking about the house, about my health, about it's time to think about the future. It's like I've already got one foot in the grave. I know they're waiting for me to die. Or at least the moment when I'm so helpless that I can't resist their plans. The house, the savings, the jewelry Clive gave me throughout 50 years of marriage. They see it all as their inheritance. Not the memory of their parents, not family values, just material assets. But I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to become a helpless old lady who can be sent to a nursing home and forgotten. I still have enough strength, intelligence, and most importantly, stubbornness to stand up to them. I glance at the clock. It's almost 10 o'clock at night. It's time for bed. Tomorrow is a new day, and I have a lot to do. I have to call Pearl, my best friend, stop by the bank, and then a book club meeting. Life goes on despite age and unfriendly relatives. As I walk up the stairs, I feel pain in my knees. The arthritis is making itself known. But I won't let it, nor my toxic family, stop me. I'm Ruth Thorndike, and I've always been a fighter. And now, at 76, I'm not going to change. Saturday started as usual, with a sore lower back and a cup of strong tea. I moved slowly around the kitchen, mechanically doing the same things I had done yesterday, the day before, and all the days before that. Put the brew in the kettle, pour boiling water, pull a box of oatmeal out of the cupboard. The measured movements calmed me, gave me the illusion of control over my life. The morning silence was broken by a phone call. I shuddered. It was rare to get a phone call this early. "Mom, it's me." Abigail's voice came through the phone. "Noel and I are coming over early today, around 2 o'clock. Do you need anything from the store?" I frowned. They usually arrive by 6 p.m. at the earliest. "Was something wrong?" I asked bluntly. "Nothing's wrong." Her voice sounded too cheerful. "It's just that we have plans tonight, and I need to visit you too. You don't have to visit me if you have other things to do," I said, even though I knew my opinion wouldn't change anything. "Don't be silly, Mom," Abigail said in a tone that didn't tolerate objection. "We'll be there at 2, and I'll ask you again. Do you need anything from the store?" "No, thanks. I went yesterday." She sighed, as if my independence was a nuisance. "Okay, well, I'll see you then." I hung up the phone and sipped my tea. Something was wrong. I knew my daughter too well to believe in a simple change of plans. Abigail never did anything for nothing. She always had a motive. After breakfast, I went to tidy up the house. Not because I was expecting guests. I never cared what Abigail and Noel thought of my lifestyle. It was just that cleaning helped me think. And right now, I definitely had a lot to think about. Over the past month, the visits from my daughter and son-in-law had become more frequent. They used to come strictly twice a week, Tuesday and Saturday. Now they found reasons to drop by on other days. They'd bring groceries I hadn't asked for, check a faucet that was supposedly leaking, it wasn't, or just to make sure I was okay. Each time, Noel wandered around the house, peering into rooms on the pretext of checking for leaks or drafts, and Abigail started talking more and more about my will, insurance, and savings. I was dusting off the photos on the mantelpiece when I came across an old picture of our house, taken back in the 80s when we'd first moved here. Clive was standing by the porch, proudly putting his arm around my shoulders. Little Abigail, about 7 at the time, was frowning at the camera. I remembered that day. Abigail was unhappy about the move because she had to break up with her friends from her old school. She had screamed that she hated the house, that it was ugly and old, that Clive and I were doing it on purpose to ruin her life. Looking at that picture now, I realized the bitter irony of the situation. She had hated the house then, and now she couldn't seem to wait to own it. The house was indeed old even then, built in the early 20th century, but solid, with character, as Clive liked to say. We'd put a lot of money into it, and even more love. Every room held memories. This was where Abigail had taken her first steps. This was where Clive had surprised me on our 20th wedding anniversary. And this was the corner where I'd cried when I'd learned of my mother's death. None of this seemed to mean anything to Abigail. She looked at the house as an asset, a structure on a piece of land in a nice neighborhood. Even talked about it openly. Mom, do you know how much real estate is worth in your neighborhood right now? It's a fortune. At exactly 2 o'clock, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. I looked out the window and saw Noel's silver sedan parked on the sidewalk. Abigail got out first, holding a bag from the grocery store. So they did bring the groceries I didn't ask for. Mom, we're here! Abigail shouted from the doorway, entering the house without knocking, as if it were her own. I came out of the living room, wiping my hands on my apron. I can hear you, I said. No need to yell at the whole house. Abigail rolled her eyes, walking into the kitchen with a bag. I got you some fruit and that bread you like, and some frozen dinners too. They're very convenient. You just heat them up in the microwave. I'm still able to cook for myself, I remarked as I watched her put the food on the table. And I don't like frozen food. It's tasteless. It's just in case, Mom, Abigail said. I don't know what could happen. Maybe you'll get sick or you won't want to stand at the stove. Noel came in next, holding a folder. He nodded at me and went straight into the living room without asking permission. What are these papers? I asked, pointing to the folder in his hands. Oh, nothing much, Noel answered too quickly. Just some papers for work. I need to go through them while Abigail helps you with the groceries. I didn't believe a word he said, but I decided not to show it. Let them think I didn't suspect anything. Okay, make yourself comfortable, I said with a smile that I hoped looked genuine. When I returned to the kitchen, I found Abigail rummaging through my refrigerator. God, Mom, you're going to spoil everything in here, she exclaimed, pulling out containers of last night's leftovers. Why do you cook so much food? You're alone. I'm used to cooking for two, I replied. Besides, I eat the leftovers the next day. Nothing goes to waste. Abigail looked at me with the same expression I hated, a mixture of pity and annoyance. Mom, Dad's been gone for 3 years. Maybe it's time to stop cooking for two. I felt anger rising inside, but I held back. I didn't need to show her how much those words hurt me. I cook as much as I think I need to, I said calmly. It's my kitchen and my refrigerator. Abigail sighed and continued putting away the food she'd brought. By the way, she began casually, do you know where Dad's deeds to the house are? Noel would like to see them. Purely out of professional interest, of course. Well, there you go. Now I understood why they'd come earlier than usual and why Noel had brought the file. Why did he want the deed to the house? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He just wants to make sure everything's okay, Abigail shrugged. You know how meticulous he is about these things. Besides, he works for an insurance company. He's got an eye for this kind of thing. The documents are in my office in the safe, I said. And I'm not going to get them. If Noel has any specific questions, he can ask me directly. Abigail's face changed instantly. The friendly mask disappeared, giving way to irritation. Mom, we're just trying to help. Why do you always have to make everything so complicated? I'm not complicating things, I replied. I just don't understand why Noel would want deeds to a house he doesn't live in and doesn't own. Abigail opened her mouth to answer, but Noel entered the kitchen at that moment. Ruth, he said with that fake smile I hated so much. I've just had a look at your upstairs bathroom. I'm afraid there's a serious problem with the tile. It's starting to pull away from the wall. It could lead to leaks and mold. I knew this was a lie. I regularly checked the condition of the bathroom and hadn't noticed any problems with the tiles. That's odd, I said. I showered in there this morning and didn't see anything like that. That's because you're not an expert, Abigail interjected. Noel is an expert on these things. Noel sells insurance, not tile, I pointed out. And I don't think I have a problem with the bathroom. Noel's face twitched slightly, but he quickly restored his smile. I still recommend calling a professional, he said. It's better to fix the problem now than to pay for major repairs later. I'll think about it, I replied, signaling that the conversation was over. Abigail and Noel exchanged glances, another one of those silent dialogues I'd learned all too well to read over the years of dealing with them. She's getting stubborn, my daughter's eyes said. We need to act differently, her husband's gaze answered. Let's have tea, I suggested, deciding to change the subject. I baked a blueberry pie yesterday. The conversation became more casual over tea, but I could feel the tension in the air. Abigail and Noelle were clearly trying to make a point, but they didn't dare do it directly. "How's your friend Pearl doing?" Abigail asked, sipping her tea. "How long have you seen her?" "Yesterday," I answered. "We went to the book club together, and then we went to that new cafe on Maple Street for a bite to eat." "Oh," Abigail looked surprised. "I didn't realize you were still so active out of the house." "Why wouldn't I be? I'm 76, not 106. I'm perfectly capable of walking to the cafe." "Sure, Mom," she agreed quickly. "It's just that, well, after that dizzy spell last month." "That was an isolated incident," I interrupted. "I just got up too fast. The doctor said it was normal for my age and nothing to worry about." Noel cleared his throat. "Speaking of worrying," he began, "Ruth, Abigail, and I have serious concerns about your house. It needs constant maintenance and repairs, and that's money and hassle." "I'm aware of the expense of homeownership, Noel," I replied. "I've lived in this house for 40 years. "Yeah, but you're on your own now," he continued. "And frankly, this neighborhood isn't what it used to be. Did you know there was a robbery on the next street over last month?" "I did hear about it, but I didn't pay much attention. Prescott has always been one of the safest towns in the state." "One robbery doesn't make a neighborhood dangerous," I countered. "Besides, I have an alarm system." "But still," Abigail interjected, "don't you think you'd be wise to move to a safer place? And where you could be taken care of in case of emergency?" "You're talking about the nursing home again," I sighed. And my answer didn't change. "No, not a nursing home," Abigail corrected me quickly. "A community for active seniors. That's different." "Call it what you want, it's the same thing." Noel coughed and changed tactics. "Ruth, do you know how much your house is on the market now?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "I was talking to a realtor in our office the other day, and he said prices in your neighborhood have gone up 30% in the last 5 years." "So what?" I asked bluntly. "I'm not going to sell the house." "But it's a great asset," Noel exclaimed. "You could sell it, buy something smaller and more comfortable, and put the rest of the money in the bank or invest it. I could help with that. I have good connections in the financial sector." I looked at both of them and suddenly everything fell into place. That's why they were so insistent on suggesting I move. It wasn't about my safety or convenience. They wanted me to sell the house while I could still make those decisions on my own. And then they probably planned to somehow access the money from the sale. "I don't need financial advice, Noel," I said firmly. "And I'm not going to sell the house. Ever." Noel's face flushed slightly, a sign that he was getting angry, but he tried not to show it. "It's not wise, Ruth," he said, trying to speak calmly. "You're sitting on a gold mine and you refuse to admit it." "This is my home, not a gold mine," I said. "And I'm going to live here for the rest of my life, whether you want me to or not." Abigail stood up suddenly, nearly knocking over her cup. "I need to go to the bathroom," she muttered, and quickly left the room. I knew she hadn't gone to the bathroom. She probably decided to take a moment to look for the deed to the house or some other important papers. But I didn't stop her. Let her think I had no clue. Noel, alone with me, decided to change his tactics. "Ruth," he began in a confidential tone, as if he were about to share a secret, "Abigail and I are really worried about you. You're getting forgetful." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow. "Give me an example." He hesitated, clearly not expecting such a direct challenge. "Well, for example." He looked around for inspiration. "These are your reading glasses. You put them in the sugar bowl." I looked at the sugar bowl. Indeed, my glasses were there. But I put them there deliberately so I wouldn't forget to clean them after breakfast. "It's not forgetfulness, Noel," I said. "It's my system. I always put my glasses in the sugar bowl when I need to clean them." "But that's weird," he objected. "Normal people don't keep their glasses in the sugar bowl." "Who says I'm normal?" I smiled, watching him fidget nervously in his chair. Abigail returned at that moment. Her face was slightly flushed, a sure sign that she hadn't found what she was looking for and was now annoyed. "Sorry it took so long," she said, sitting back down at the table. "You have a clogged drain in the upstairs bathroom." Another lie. "I took a bath this morning and the drain was working fine." "That's strange," I said. It was fine this morning. We'll have to check it out. The rest of their visit passed in a tense atmosphere. They didn't bring up the subject of selling the house or moving again, but I could see them exchanging glances, whispering in the kitchen when they thought I couldn't hear. Before she left, Abigail suddenly remembered some urgent need to look in my office. "I just want to show Noel that beautiful lamp Dad brought back from Italy," she said, trying to sound casual. I knew it wasn't the lamp they were interested in, but the safe that stood in the study. But I let them in, watching Noel look around the room with an appraising eye, lingering for a second on the safe in the corner. "Nice lamp," he said without much enthusiasm. "Must be expensive." "Priceless," I replied. "Like so many things in this house." When they finally left, I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, feeling the tension of the last few hours turn to fatigue. Something was happening. Something not good. Abigail and Noelle were clearly up to something, and that something involved me, my house, and my money. I walked through the office and over to the safe. Dialing the code, I opened the heavy door and checked the contents. Everything was there. The deeds to the house, the insurance policies, the will I'd updated after Clive's death, and a small jewelry box that did have value, both tangible and sentimental. Closing the safe, I went to the window and looked out onto the street. Noel's silver sedan was still parked by the sidewalk. They were sitting inside, and judging by their gesticulations, they were talking about something. Abigail looked annoyed. Noel looked tense. Finally, the car pulled away and disappeared around the corner. I went back into the living room and sat down in my chair. I needed to think about the situation. What were they up to? Just selling the house to gain access to the money? Or something more serious? Maybe they wanted to declare me incapacitated so they could gain control of all my assets? The thought made me go cold. I'd heard about such cases from Pearl, whose cousin was in a similar situation. His children forged medical documents claiming he had dementia and got guardianship. Then they sold his house, moved him to the cheapest nursing home, and embezzled all his savings. No, I'm not going to let something like that happen to me. I'm still sane, still capable of making decisions and defending myself. But in order to do that, I need to stay alert and maybe take some preventative measures. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Pearl's number. I needed the advice of a trusted friend, and Pearl was that person. In 50 years of friendship, she'd never given me reason to question her loyalty. "Pearl, it's Ruth," I said when she picked up the phone. "We need to talk. It seems my daughter and her husband are up to something, and I don't like the look of it." After talking to Pearl, I spent a few days in tense anticipation. My friend agreed that Abigail and Noel's behavior looked suspicious and advised me to be careful. "Ruth, I know this type of person," she told me then. "They won't stop until they get what they want. Be on your guard." And I was on guard. I started noticing details I'd overlooked before. The way Noel took pictures of rooms in my house on his phone, ostensibly to consult with a repair specialist. The way Abigail went through my closets and drawers thinking I couldn't see. How they whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. Tuesday came unexpectedly quickly. I spent the morning in restless thought, going over possible scenarios in my head for Abigail and Noel's upcoming visit. What would they come up with this time? What new tactics would they use to convince me to sell the house or move into their infamous, active senior community? By evening, I felt like a taut string. It seemed like just a little more, and I would just burst from the tension. I decided to take the sedative my doctor had prescribed me after Clive's death. I rarely used it, preferring to face problems with a clear head, but today I needed to dull my emotions a little to keep my composure during their visit. I was just pouring myself a glass of water to wash down the pill when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. I looked out the window and saw Noel's silver sedan. They'd arrived earlier than usual. It was only 6:30 instead of 6. I quickly tucked the packet of pills into the pocket of my robe. I didn't want them to see that I was sedated. Knowing Abigail, she could use that as another argument for why I wasn't doing well on my own. The doorbell rang with a sharp, insistent sound. I took my time opening it, walking slowly to the door. Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob. Abigail and Noelle stood on the threshold. My daughter was holding a large paper bag with the restaurant's logo on it. "Mom!" she exclaimed in an overly cheerful voice. "We decided to surprise you and brought you dinner from the Olive Garden." "Hi, Ruth," Noel nodded, walking past me into the house. I stepped aside, letting them inside. Olive Garden was Clive's favorite restaurant, but I doubted Abigail remembered that. It was probably just a coincidence. "How nice of you," I said, trying to make my voice sound sincere. "I was just about to cook." "You won't have to." Abigail went into the kitchen and started pulling containers of food out of a bag. "We have seafood pasta for you, lasagna for me, and steak for Noel, and tiramisu for dessert." I helped her set the food on the table, noting that her mood seemed too elevated and her smile too wide. Something was definitely wrong. "What will you have to drink, Mom? Do you have any wine?" Abigail asked, opening the refrigerator. "I don't drink wine on medication, you know that," I replied. "Water would be fine." "Sure, sure," she agreed quickly. "Noel, do you want wine or beer?" "Water," he said from the living room. "I have to drive." We sat down at the table and dinner began in a strangely tense atmosphere. Abigail and Noel exchanged glances more often than usual, and their conversation seemed rehearsed. "How are you doing, Mom?" Abigail asked, twirling the pasta on her fork. "Have you been sleeping well lately?" "The usual," I answered evasively. "Why?" "Just wondering," she shrugged. "A lot of people your age suffer from insomnia." "People at my age suffer from all sorts of things," I pointed out. "Not always physical." Abigail pretended not to take the hint and turned to Noel. "Honey, did you tell your mom about your promotion?" Noel coughed, wiping his lips with a napkin. "No, not yet. Ruth, I have good news. I've been promoted to Senior Insurance Product Manager." "Congratulations," I said, not particularly impressed. "What does that mean?" "More money, more responsibility," he replied with a smug smile. "And importantly, better corporate insurance. Now it extends to immediate family members as well." That was it. Now I was beginning to see where they were going with this. "That's great for you," I said. "But I already have insurance. The one Clive and I took out years ago." "Yes, but it doesn't cover long-term care," Abigail put in quickly. "And Noel's new insurance might include that. Can you imagine the savings?" I set my fork down slowly, feeling the irritation building inside me. "Why would I need long-term care insurance?" I asked bluntly. "I'm not going to go into a hospital or a nursing home." "No one plans for those things, Mom," Abigail sighed. "But it's better to be prepared. Age takes its toll." "My age doesn't stop me from living on my own," I countered. "And it won't for the foreseeable future." "No one's saying you can't live on your own, Ruth," Noel interjected in that soothing tone that always got on my nerves. "But you have to face reality. Statistics show that most people over 75 need help sooner or later." "I'm not a statistic, Noel. I'm a human being." "Of course, Mom." Abigail put her hand on mine. I struggled to keep from yanking it away. "We just want you to be safe and get the care you need when the time comes." "When the time comes? Not if, but when." I gave her a hard look. "You've already decided that I'm going to be incapacitated soon?" Abigail rolled her eyes, the way she always did when she thought I was being dramatic. "No one's talking about incapacitation, Mom. Just about realistically planning for the future." "My future is my own," I cut her off. "And there's no room in my plans for nursing homes or active senior communities, as you call them." Noel cleared his throat, a sure sign that he was about to say something I didn't want to hear. "Ruth, do you know how much it costs to maintain this house every month? Heating, electricity, water, property taxes?" He started curling his fingers. "Now add to that the cost of repairs that the old house will inevitably need. The roof, plumbing, electrical wiring, all of it will need replacing sooner or later." "I know how much it costs to maintain my house, Noel," I replied. "I've lived here for 40 years and I pay the bills every month." "But your pension doesn't last forever, Mom," Abigail interjected. "And the cost of living is rising. What will you do when your savings run out?" "My finances are my business," I said firmly. "And believe me, I'm not going to be broke." Abigail and Noelle exchanged glances again. Another one of those silent dialogues they'd been having behind my back. "Okay, let's change the subject," Abigail suggested, obviously deciding to change tactics. "How's your book club going? Are you reading anything interesting?" The rest of dinner passed in relatively peaceful conversation about books, the weather, and the latest city news. But I sensed they hadn't abandoned their plans, just decided to back off for a while. After the meal, Abigail began clearing the table, and I offered to make tea. "I'll help," Noel said, getting up from the table. "Ruth, why don't you rest in the living room? You look a little tired." It wasn't a request, but an attempt to get me out of the kitchen so they could talk alone. Normally I would have objected, but now I decided to play along. Maybe I could find out what they were whispering about behind my back. "I guess you're right," I said, faking tiredness. "I'll sit in the living room for a while." I walked slowly out of the kitchen, but instead of going into the living room, I stopped in the hallway by the door. From here, I could hear their conversation without being noticed. "I can't convince her nicely," Noel said in a muffled voice. "She's too stubborn." "I know," Abigail sighed. "She's always been like that. But now it's not just stubbornness anymore. It's a refusal to accept reality." "Time is playing against us," Noel continued. "If we don't deal with this now, it's only going to get harder later. The house keeps losing value and it's becoming less and less rational." I barely restrained myself from bursting into the kitchen and telling them what I thought of their concern. But instead, I forced myself to stand still and listen further. "I talked to Dr. Price," Abigail said. "He thinks she may be showing early signs of dementia, forgetfulness, stubbornness, denial of the obvious." I felt the blood rush from my face. Dr. Price couldn't say that he'd last seen me 6 months ago, and he'd said then that I was in great shape for my age. Abigail was lying, and it wasn't just a lie, it was preparation for something more serious. "Then we need to step up our game," Noel insisted. "I've already talked to Simon at Sun Valley. They can accept her as early as next month. But we need her consent, or we'll have to go to court. And that's long and expensive." Sun Valley. I heard about that place from Pearl. It wasn't just a nursing home. It was a facility for the elderly with dementia and other serious illnesses. A place where they sent people who were deemed incapable of taking care of themselves. "We should try it again," Abigail said. "Maybe we should get Judith involved." Mom always listened to her sister. "Is Judith on our side?" Noel asked. "She agrees that Mom needs care," Abigail replied, especially after I told her what Dr. Price said. Another lie. My sister Judith lived in Arizona and called me every Sunday. I hadn't told her about my suspicions about Abigail's plans, but I was sure my sister would never support the idea of sending me to a nursing home against my will. "What if she refuses anyway?" Noel asked. "We don't have much time. If the house continues to lose value—" "I know," Abigail replied sharply. "Do you think I like it? She is my mother, after all. But we have to be practical. This house is all she has of value, and if we don't sell it now, it might be too late." I heard the sound of pouring water. Apparently, Noel was filling the kettle. "You have to be harder on her," he said. "After all, it's in her best interest, too. She can't live here forever, alone, in this huge house." "I know," Abigail repeated. It's not easy. No matter what, she's still my mother." "This is no time for sentimentality," Noel said. "This is about financial security, our financial security. Do you want to work another 10 years to save for retirement? Or do you want us to be able to afford that house in Santa Barbara we've been dreaming about?" There was a pause, and I imagined Abigail weighing her concern for me against her financial interests. I already knew which would be outweighed. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll put my mother in a nursing home. But first I have to convince her to sign the papers to sell the house. Otherwise, none of this makes sense." I froze, feeling those words penetrate me like icy spears. I'll put my mother in a nursing home. Not help her move in, not find a better place for her, but turn her in, like an old thing that was no longer needed but could bring some benefit when disposed of. My knees nearly buckled, and I grabbed the wall to keep from falling. The shock of what I heard was so intense that for a moment I thought I was going to pass out. Noel's phone rang in the kitchen, and I heard him answer it. "Yes, Simon?" "Yes, we're just discussing it." "No, it's not finalized yet, but we're on the right track." "Yeah, sure, I'll call you tomorrow." I had to leave before they realized I was eavesdropping. I quietly backed away from the door and walked quickly into the living room, sinking into my chair just as Abigail came out of the kitchen with a tray. "Here's the tea, Mother," she said with a fake smile. "I added some honey, just the way you like it." I looked at her and didn't recognize her. This woman, my daughter, had just discussed how to get rid of me for money, how to send me to a place I would hate just to get access to my property. "Thank you, dear," I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. Noel followed her in, holding his cup. "Sorry for the delay," he said. "It was a work call." "That's okay," I replied, taking a sip of my tea and trying not to show how much my hands were shaking. They sat down across from me and we started talking about nothing. I barely listened, my mind preoccupied with what I had just heard. They wanted to get rid of me. My own daughter saw me as a burden to be gotten rid of, and my house as an asset to be cashed out as soon as possible. After an hour, they finally left, promising to stop by on Saturday. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, feeling the strength leave me. Only now that I was alone did I let myself realize the depth of the betrayal. Tears came to my eyes, but I blinked them away. This was no time for weakness. I needed to think. I needed to act. Abigail and Noel had left me no choice. If I didn't want to spend the rest of my days in some institution, watching them squander the money from the sale of my house, I had to do something drastic. I went into my office and sat at my desk, turning on the desk lamp. In its warm light, I began to think about a plan of action. They wanted to play dirty with me? Well, I would show them that Ruth Thorndike was not so easily fooled. By midnight, I had a plan. Risky, but doable. It required careful preparation, the help of a few reliable people, and, above all, courage. But I was willing to take the risk. After all, what did I have to lose? My freedom? They were already planning to take it away. My home? They were already aiming for it. I picked up my phone and dialed Pearl's number. Despite the late hour, I knew she wouldn't mind my call. Pearl had always been a midnight person. "Pearl," I said when she answered, "I'm sorry to call so late, but I'm in serious trouble. I need your help." I began to tell her what I had heard and what I was going to do. A plan began to form in my head. A plan that would shock Abigail and Noel, make them forget their intentions, and most importantly, secure my freedom and safety for the rest of my life. They were going to put me in a nursing home and sell my house? Well, I'll give them a surprise they'll never forget. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold, and I intended to give them a treat that would make them lose their appetite for other people's property. Wednesday morning greeted me with an unusual determination. I hadn't slept much the night before, working out the details of my plan, but I didn't feel tired. The adrenaline and anger were doing their job. I was full of an energy I hadn't felt in years. The plan I had developed during the night seemed more and more realistic in the light of day. I'd been an accountant for 42 years, and I knew more about money and paperwork than Abigail and Noel had ever imagined. They thought I was a forgetful old lady, but they would soon realize how wrong they were. The first thing I did was call Pearl. Despite the early hour, it was only 7 in the morning, she was already awake. "Is everything ready?" I asked without preamble. "Ruth, are you sure you want to do this?" Pearl sounded worried. "Maybe you should talk to Abigail first. Explain what you know about her plans?" I shook my head, even though I knew she couldn't see it. "No, Pearl. I heard everything with my own ears. I'm putting my mother in a nursing home," is what my daughter said. "No amount of talking is going to help after that?" Pearl sighed. "Okay, I understand. Yes, everything's all set. The room will be waiting for you tonight. Thank you," I said sincerely. "I couldn't have done it without you." "What else are friends for?" There was finally a smile in her voice. "Just be careful they don't see you packing, and try not to do anything stupid with your surprise for them." "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing," I assured her. "And then, they deserve a good lesson." After talking to Pearl, I got down to business. The first item on my plan was financial security. I pulled all the important documents out of the safe: birth certificate, passport, insurance policies, house deeds, bank statements. I folded it all neatly into a small folder, which I stashed in the bag I had prepared for the trip. Then I dialed the number of my old friend and colleague, Harold Pratt. We had worked together in an accounting firm for 20 years, and now he was a manager at a small local bank. If anyone could help me with the financial part of the plan, it was him. Harold, I need your help, I said bluntly when he answered. It's urgent and confidential. Ruth? He sounded surprised. What's wrong? I need to transfer some of my savings to a new account, one that no one but me will have access to, and I need to do it today. There was a pause. I could almost see Harold frowning on the other end of the line. That sounds unusual. Are you in trouble? You could say that, I replied. My daughter and her husband plan to declare me incompetent and put me in a nursing home to gain control of my estate. Oh my God, Ruth, Harold exclaimed. Are you sure? Positive. I heard them talking with my own ears. There was another pause, a longer one. All right, Harold said at last. I can help. Come to the bank at 10 o'clock in the morning and we'll get everything organized. Just remember that any large transfers can raise questions. I remember the banking laws, Harold, I said with slight irritation. I'm not going to ask you to do anything illegal. Just help me protect what is rightfully mine. Of course, Ruth. I'm sorry. I'll see you at 10. I hung up the phone and moved on to the next step in the plan. I needed to pack the necessary things without arousing suspicion. I pulled out the small suitcase I usually use for trips to my sister's house in Arizona and started putting the essentials in it: clothes, medicine, toiletries. Nothing extra, just what I would need for the coming week. Then I opened the jewelry box. Most of it had sentimental rather than material value to me. Clive's gifts on our wedding anniversaries. Jewelry passed down from my mother, a brooch Abigail had given me as a child for Mother's Day. I picked out a few of my most treasured items and put them in a special pouch, which I then tucked into a hidden pocket of my suitcase. Looking at the picture with Clive on the bedside table, I felt a sudden sadness. What would he say when he saw what our daughter had become? What would he do if he were me? I was sure he would have supported me. Clive had always valued justice and had no tolerance for greed. I took the photograph and put it in my suitcase. Then I took out the box where I kept my most important documents and a small amount of cash in case of an emergency. $5,000, not much by today's standards, but enough to last me for a while without using bank cards that could give away my location. When packing was complete, I stashed the suitcase in a first-floor closet where Abigail would be unlikely to look. Then I changed my clothes and got ready for my trip to the bank. Before I left the house, I wrote a short note. Dear Abigail and Noel, I had to leave on urgent business. Don't worry about me, I'm fine. I'll be back in a few days, Mom. That note was supposed to buy me some time before they started searching in earnest. I hailed a cab to the bank, deciding not to use my car. It would be too easy to trace. When I got into the cab, I felt a strange excitement, almost like when Clive and I used to go on spontaneous trips when I was younger. Only now I was alone, and this wasn't a recreational trip, but an attempt to protect my freedom and dignity. Harold was waiting for me at the bank. Despite his age, he was 74. He looked as trim and energetic as ever. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his eyes had the same keen intelligence I remembered from our years together. Ruth, he greeted me at the entrance to his office. Come in, I've got everything ready. We spent almost 2 hours in his office. Harold helped me open a new account at another bank, into which I transferred a substantial amount of my savings, not enough to arouse suspicion, but enough to make me financially independent for a long time. We also discussed the legal aspects of my situation. You should consult a lawyer, Ruth, Harold advised. If your daughter really plans to challenge your legal capacity, you'll need a legal defense. I know, I nodded. I already have an appointment with Lawrence Phelps next week. She specializes in elder law. Harold nodded approvingly. Lawrence is an excellent choice. She won't give you a hard time. When all the financial matters were settled, I asked Harold to do me one more favor, to mail an envelope of documents to my new address in a few days. He agreed without further question. Harold had always been a good friend who respected other people's decisions, even if he didn't fully understand them. After leaving the bank, I went to the notary's office where I had several important documents notarized. Then I visited my doctor, Dr. Linda Chen, to get a mental health certificate, a document I could use in the event of a legal battle with Abigail. Dr. Chen was surprised by my request, but after explaining the situation, she agreed to help. Mrs. Thorndyke, I've been seeing you for 15 years, she said as she signed the report. And I can say with certainty that your cognitive functions are perfectly fine. In fact, you're in better shape than many of my patients who are 20 years younger than you. Thank you, Dr. Chen. I smiled as I accepted the document. I hope I won't have to use this report, but I'd better have it with me, just in case. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all the necessary business was completed, and I returned home to finalize my preparations. Now came the most difficult, but also the most satisfying part of the plan, preparing a surprise for Abigail and Noel. I pulled out of my secret drawer copies of all the conversations I had recorded over the past month. After I'd begun to suspect they were up to something, I'd started secretly recording our conversations on the small tape recorder I always carried in my pocket. I now had proof of their plans, recordings of them discussing how to get rid of me and sell my house. I then drafted a detailed letter outlining the entire history of our relationship, their manipulations, and their plans for my future. I included copies of my mental health records, bank statements showing that I was more than capable of managing my finances, and of course, recordings of their conversations. Not only did I address this letter to Abigail and Noel, but I sent copies to my sister Judith, my lawyer, and even Noel's boss at the insurance company. The latter was probably petty of me, but I knew Noel valued his reputation at the company. Let his coworkers know what kind of man he really was. But I had the most exquisite gift for last. Knowing that Abigail and Noel would panic when they discovered my disappearance and rush to check the safe with the documents, I decided to leave them a special message. I opened the safe and took out all the documents except for one folder. Instead, I put an envelope inside labeled "For my daughter." Inside the envelope, I put a handwritten letter telling her that I was aware of their plans, that I would not let them control my fate, and that I had taken certain steps to protect myself and my possessions. "Dear Abigail," I wrote, "by the time you read this letter, I shall be far away. Don't worry, I won't hurt myself. I value my life too much, which you and Noel are so eager to control. I've simply decided to take my fate into my own hands. I heard your conversation with Noel in the kitchen. I'm putting my mother in a nursing home, is what you said. You know, even in our most difficult moments, I couldn't imagine my own daughter talking about me in those terms, like an old thing that it's time to throw away. I also know about your plans to sell my house, the house where you grew up, where your father and I created family memories that you obviously don't value. To you, it's just an asset to cash in. Well, I have news for you. I am not a helpless old woman to be manipulated. I've taken steps to protect myself and my assets. All important documents and a large portion of my savings are now in a safe place out of your reach. I have also consulted with a lawyer and obtained a medical report on my mental health so that any attempt to declare me incompetent will be met with serious legal resistance. I won't tell you where I've gone, but know that I'm safe and surrounded by people who truly care about me, not my money or possessions. One last thing. I've changed my will. The new version takes into account your true intentions. Think about it before you decide to continue your game. Love, no matter what, your mother, Ruth. After rereading the letter, I nodded satisfied and sealed the envelope. Then I put it in the safe, locked the door, and tucked the key into my pocket. I knew Abigail knew the combination to the safe. She'd peeked at it when I'd opened it. There was one last detail left, the single folder I'd left in the safe along with the letter. It was my old will, the one that made Abigail the primary heir to all my property. I didn't bother destroying it. It would serve as bait, making them think they could still get what they wanted if they found me and convinced me to come back. In reality, my new will, drafted with the help of Lawrence Phelps 3 days ago, was already lying in a safe place in the lawyer's office. In it, I distributed my assets differently. Some to charitable organizations, some to my sister Judith and her children, and Abigail would receive only a token amount of $1,000. Enough to keep her from contesting the will on the grounds that I'd forgotten about her, but not enough to satisfy her greed. Glancing at the clock, I saw that it was 5:30. It was time to leave. I took my suitcase out of the closet, checked the contents one more time, and made sure I hadn't forgotten anything. Then I walked around the house, making sure all the windows were closed and the appliances were off. I didn't know when I'd be back, if ever, and I didn't want to leave the house in danger. In the hallway, I stopped at the mirror and looked at myself. Gray hair, a wrinkled face, tired eyes. but there was a fire of determination in those eyes now. I didn't look like a helpless old woman who could be easily fooled. I looked like a woman ready to fight for my life and dignity. I put my urgent business note in a prominent place in the hallway, then put on my coat, grabbed my suitcase, and left the house. A cab was waiting for me outside, ready to take me to Pearl's, where I planned to stay for the first time. As I got into the car, I took one last look at my house. 40 years of memories, joys, and sorrows. The house I loved and where I hoped to spend the rest of my days. I didn't know if I would ever see it again, but I was willing to risk everything to preserve my freedom. As the cab pulled away, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and release. I was leaving behind not only my home, but also my illusions about my daughter and her husband. It was painful but necessary. On the drive to Pearl's, I imagined how Abigail and Noelle would discover my disappearance. At first, they would find the note and probably not give it much thought. But when a day or two passed and I didn't return, they'd start to worry not about me, of course, but about their plans. They'll rush to check the safe, find the letter, and realize that I know all about it and have taken action. Their panic will grow as they realize their plans are falling apart. And then, when they start receiving copies of my revealing letter from other recipients, their panic will turn to terror. The thought made me smile. Maybe it was petty of me, but I couldn't help but feel satisfaction at the thought of their confusion and fear. They wanted to play games with me? Well, I showed them that I could play games too, and I was just as good. The cab pulled up to Pearl's house, a small, cozy cottage on the outskirts of Prescott. I paid the driver and got out, feeling like a new chapter of my life was beginning. A chapter in which I would decide my own fate, not letting anyone, not even my own daughter, deprive me of my freedom and dignity. Pearl met me on the doorstep with a smile and hot tea. Her bed was already made in her guest room, and a vase of fresh flowers stood on the table. She always knew how to lighten the mood. "Well, Ruth Thorndyke," she said, helping me with my suitcase. "Are you ready for an adventure in your old age?" "More than ready," I answered with a smile. "It's about time we showed the youngsters that we can still surprise them." The first day of my disappearance began with an unusual feeling of freedom. I woke up in Pearl's guest bedroom, and for a moment I was confused, not realizing where I was. Then the memories of yesterday came flooding back, and I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Pearl was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and frying bacon filled the house. "Good morning, fugitive," she smiled as I appeared in the kitchen. "How did you sleep in your new place?" "Surprisingly well," I replied, taking a seat at the table. For the first time in a long time, I slept without worrying about what Abigail and Noelle were up to behind my back. Pearl set a plate of scrambled eggs and bacon in front of me. "Eat. You need your strength. We have a busy week ahead of us." We ate breakfast, discussing a plan of action for the next few days. The first thing I wanted to do was contact Lawrence Phelps' attorney to discuss additional legal defenses. Then I needed to call Judith's sister and explain the situation before she heard the distorted version from Abigail. "Do you think they've discovered your absence yet?" Pearl asked, pouring me another cup of coffee. "I don't think so." I shook my head. "They don't come in on Thursday. They'll probably find my note tomorrow night or Saturday. And then there'll be a panic." Pearl smiled slyly. "Exactly." I couldn't help but smile back. "But for now, we have time to prepare for the next stage." After breakfast, I called Lawrence Phelps. Fortunately, she was able to accommodate me that afternoon. Pearl lent me her car, and I drove to the attorney's office located in downtown Flagstaff, a neighboring town to Prescott. Lawrence Phelps turned out to be an energetic woman in her 50s with a piercing gaze and a determined chin. After hearing my story, she shook her head. "Unfortunately, Mrs. Thorndyke, these cases are not uncommon," she said. "Many elderly people are victims of financial abuse at the hands of their own children." "I never thought I'd be in this situation," I sighed. "Abigail has always been a difficult child, but I didn't expect this betrayal." "Greed makes people unrecognizable," Lawrence opened her laptop. "But you did the right thing by seeking legal help. Let's look at what other steps we can take to protect you." We spent nearly 3 hours discussing various legal tools. Lawrence helped me draw up a power of attorney in the event of incapacity, appointing my sister Judith rather than Abigail as my attorney in fact. We also executed a restraining order to force me into any institutionalization without my consent, and the testimony of at least 2 independent doctors. Those documents give you a lot of protection, Lawrence explained when we'd completed the formalities. Now, even if your daughter tried to challenge your legal capacity, she would have very little chance of success. Back at Pearl's, I felt more confident. At least now I had a legal defense against the worst-case scenario. The only thing left to decide was what to do with the house and the rest of the property. I'm thinking about selling the house, I admitted to Pearl over dinner. Not because it was too big for me, as Abigail and Noelle had claimed, but because it was now associated with bitter memories. And where would you move to? Pearl asked, serving me a second helping of her specialty roast. I haven't decided yet. Maybe closer to Judith in Arizona. Or maybe I'll find a small apartment here in Flagstaff. You can always stay with me as long as you need to, Pearl suggested. This house is too big for a lonely old lady like me. I shook her hand gratefully. Pearl had always been not just a friend, but a true sister in spirit. On the second day of my disappearance, I called Judith. My sister was horrified when she heard about Abigail's plans. I'd always known she was selfish, but this was out of line. Judith was outraged. How could she even think of putting you in a nursing home against your will? Money does strange things to people, I said sadly. Especially when they think they're entitled to everything just by birthright. You were right to go to a lawyer, Judith said approvingly. I'll support you if it goes to court, and of course I'd be happy to be your confidant. Talking to my sister gave me strength. Even though we lived far apart, Judith was always someone I could rely on. I spent the third day in quiet reflection. Pearl had gone on her business, and I was alone in her cozy house. Sitting on the veranda with a cup of tea, I reflected on my life, on the decisions that had brought me to this moment. I remembered how I had raised Abigail, how I had tried to give her the best, how I had encouraged her ambitions and dreams. Where had I gone wrong? At what point had my daughter turned into someone capable of betraying her own mother for money? Toward evening, Pearl returned with the news. I called Maud, she said, referring to our mutual friend from Prescott. She'd seen Abigail and Noel. They came by your house this afternoon. Apparently, they found your note and are now looking for you. So soon? I was surprised. I thought they wouldn't show up until tomorrow. I guess they were anxious to get on with their plan, Pearl suggested. Maud said they looked worried. They asked the neighbors if anyone had seen you. I smiled, imagining their confusion. Then my smile faded. No matter what, Abigail was still my daughter, and the thought of such a gap between us was painful. On the fourth day, I decided to check my cell phone, which I had kept turned off until now. When I turned it on, I found a slew of missed calls and messages from Abigail. Their tone varied from neutrally concerned, "Mom, where are you? Please call me," to downright panicked, "Mom, we've gone to the police. Please let me know you're okay." The last message was sent an hour ago. "Mom, I found your letter in the safe. We need to talk. Please call me back." So they got to the safe and read my message. I wondered if they had already found the rest of the copies I had sent. I decided not to answer the calls and messages. Let them suffer for a few more days. Instead, I called the Prescott Police Department, introduced myself, and explained that I had left voluntarily and was perfectly safe. I didn't want police resources wasted looking for someone who wasn't missing. The officer who took my call seemed understanding. "Mrs. Thorndyke, you're not the first elderly lady who's decided to teach her overprotective relatives a lesson," he said with a faint chuckle in his voice. "I'll note in my report that you're fine and left voluntarily. But maybe you should contact your daughter." She seemed genuinely concerned. "I'll contact her when I'm ready," I replied firmly. "Believe me, officer, I have good reasons for this behavior." On the fifth day, Pearl and I decided to get a change of scenery and went on a little excursion around Flagstaff. It was a beautiful day, sunny but not too hot, perfect for walking. We visited a local botanical garden, then had lunch at a cozy cafe overlooking the mountains. I felt like a tourist, carefree and free. No worries about someone monitoring my actions, assessing my behavior for signs of forgetfulness, or planning my future without my consent. "This carefree attitude suits you," Pearl remarked as we sipped wine on the cafe terrace. "You look younger." "I feel younger," I admitted. like I'd shed a heavy weight I didn't even realize I was carrying. When we got back to Pearl's house, we found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a letter from Lawrence Phelps. The lawyer reported that Abigail had contacted her, demanding information about my whereabouts and accusing her of assisting in the kidnapping of an incapacitated person. Of course, I denied all charges and reminded your daughter of the legal documents proving your full legal capacity, Lawrence wrote. She was extremely annoyed and threatened legal action. I advised her to consult with her attorney first before making any rash statements. I handed the letter to Pearl, who read it with a growing smile. They're panicking, she stated. The plan is crumbling before their eyes. Yes, I nodded. But this is just the beginning. I wondered if Noel's boss had already contacted him about my letter. On the sixth day, I decided to call my neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, to find out what was going on in my house. She was always observant, and she wasn't particularly fond of Abigail. "Oh, Ruth, darling, there's something going on," she exclaimed when she heard my voice. "Your daughter and that husband of hers have almost taken up residence in your house. They come every day, rummaging through your things, yelling at each other. Yesterday, some man in an expensive suit, probably a lawyer. They had a long talk in a high-pitched tone." "And the police didn't come again?" I asked. "No. After you called, they told Abigail you were fine and left voluntarily." She was furious, demanding they keep looking, but the officer was adamant. I thanked Mrs. Kowalski for the information and asked her to keep watching. She enthusiastically agreed. The neighbor always liked to be in the middle of things. That evening, Harold Pratt called me. "Ruth, I don't know what you did, but your daughter and son-in-law were just at the bank trying to get your account information," he informed me. Of course, I turned them down, citing bank secrecy. They were very persistent, especially Noel. He even implied that he was willing to pay for the information unofficially. "I hope you didn't fall for his offer?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "What do you take me for, Ruth Thorndyke?" Harold's voice sounded fake indignation. "I've been in finance for 40 years, and I've never once violated professional ethics." I politely suggested that he leave my office before I called security. I laughed, imagining the scene. "Thank you, Harold. I knew I could count on you." "You're welcome," he replied. "But tell me, are you okay? They said you were mentally unstable and needed help." "I'm perfectly fine," I assured him. "I just thought I'd teach those who think I'm easy prey because of my age a lesson." On the 7th day of my disappearance, I felt it was time to finalize this phase of the plan. I'd gotten all the necessary legal guarantees, secured my finances, and given Abigail and Noel enough time to realize the gravity of the situation. I called a real estate agent and arranged to view several apartments in Flagstaff the next day. I decided I didn't want to go back to my old house. Too many heavy memories. Instead, I would start a new life here, closer to Pearl and away from Abigail and Noel's toxic influence. After that, I finally decided to call my daughter. I stared at the phone for a long time, gathering my wits, and finally pressed the call button. Abigail answered after the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for my call. "Mom?" Her voice sounded both concerned and angry. "Where are you? We are going crazy with worry." "I'm safe, Abigail," I replied calmly. "And I'm not going home until we straighten out some things." "What things?" Her tone turned defensive. "If you mean that letter you left in the safe, there's been a misunderstanding. We never planned to send you to a nursing home against your will." "Don't lie to me, Abigail." My voice became harsher. "I heard you talking in the kitchen. 'I'm putting my mother in a nursing home,' were your exact words." There was a pause. I could almost see her frantically searching for an explanation that might soften the situation. "You misunderstood, Mother," she finally said. "We were discussing a hypothetical situation if your health were to deteriorate drastically." "And that's why you were in contact with Sun Valley? And that's why you lied to Judith about Dr. Price's opinion of my mental health?" Again the pause, longer. "Where are you?" Abigail finally asked, ignoring my questions. "I'm coming to get you. We need to talk in person." "No," I answered firmly. "I'll contact you tomorrow and let you know where and when we'll meet. On my terms, not yours." "Mom, this is ridiculous. You're acting like a capricious child." I felt anger rising in me. No, Abigail, you're acting like a greedy child who can't wait to get his parents' toys. Only in this case, the toys are my house and my money, and I'm the obstacle that needs to get out of the way. You're being unfair. Her voice trembled, but I couldn't tell if it was from resentment or exposure. Noel and I are just worried about your future. My future or your financial well-being, I parried. It doesn't matter. I'll call you tomorrow. In the meantime, please leave my house. I didn't give you permission to be there in my absence. I hung up without waiting for her answer. My hands were shaking slightly, but overall I felt satisfied. For the first time in a long time, I spoke to Abigail as an equal, without the fear and guilt she'd so skillfully induced in me. Pearl, who had heard my part of the conversation, nodded approvingly. You were marvelous, Ruth. Firm, but without being overly aggressive. I sighed, sinking into the chair. This was harder than I'd expected. No matter what, she's still my daughter. That's why she needs this lesson, Pearl said. If there's any humanity left in her, she'll realize what she's done, and maybe she'll change. I nodded, though I didn't share Pearl's optimism. Abigail had always been stubborn and selfish. I doubted she was capable of real remorse. That evening, Pearl and I sat on the veranda, watching the sunset and sipping white wine. I felt strangely light, as if I had shed a heavy weight I had been carrying for years. You know, I said, looking up at the golden sky. When I heard Abigail talk about the nursing home, I was terrified. But now I'm almost grateful to her. Without it, I would have continued to live under the illusion that my daughter cared about me, not my money. Sometimes we need a good shock to see the truth, Pearl said philosophically, especially when it comes to family. We tend to turn a blind eye to the faults of those we love. I nodded, thinking about the years I'd spent trying in vain to earn my daughter's sincere love. How many times had I ignored the obvious signs of her selfishness and mercantilism, writing them off as complex character or modern outlook? Tomorrow begins a new chapter of my life, I said, raising my glass. A life without toxic relationships and manipulation. A life where I make my own decisions and don't let anyone dictate to me how I should spend my final years. Here's to new beginnings. Pearl raised her glass and they clinked quietly in the evening air. We sat in silence, watching the last rays of the sun color the sky with purple and pink hues. I thought about tomorrow, about my upcoming meeting with Abigail and Noel, about the apartments I would be looking at, about the new life that awaited me. The 7 days of my disappearance had changed me more than I could have imagined. I had come to Pearl as a frightened and confused elderly woman who her own daughter was planning to put into a nursing home. And I left strong, determined, and ready to fight for my rights and freedom. Abigail and Noel wanted to get rid of an inconvenient old lady so they could get their hands on her property. Well, they learned a lesson they'll remember for a long time. I showed them that age is not a judgment, and that even at 76, a woman can stand up for herself. Tomorrow I will face them face to face, not as a frightened mother, but as a person who knows her rights and won't let anyone violate them. Returning to Prescott filled me with a strange mixture of emotions. On the one hand, I felt nostalgic. After all, this town had been my home for over 40 years. On the other, I felt determined and sure that I was doing the right thing. Pearl insisted on accompanying me, but I refused. This was my battle, and I had to win it myself. Are you sure? She asked one last time as we stood outside her house, waiting for the cab that would take me to Prescott. Abigail and Noel will be furious. They might try to pressure you or manipulate you. I'm ready, I replied, hugging my friend tightly. Thanks to you and these 7 days of disappearing, I'm stronger than ever. Pearl nodded, pride in her eyes. Call me as soon as it's over. And remember, you can always come back if things go wrong. The cab took me to a small apartment complex on the outskirts of Prescott. The 2-story red brick building looked cozy and safe, exactly what I was looking for. I had rented this apartment until 3 days ago, working with an agent over the phone. It was fully furnished with 2 bedrooms, a spacious living room, and a small balcony overlooking a picturesque park. After getting the keys from the building manager, I went up to my new apartment on the 2nd floor. The space was smaller than my old house, but much more functional for a single elderly woman. No stairs for sore knees, no hard-to-reach closets or pantries. Everything was designed for comfortable and safe living. I unpacked the few belongings I had brought with me and began to settle in. I arranged the photos: Clive's, Judith's, a few close friends. I decided not to put Abigail's pictures up, at least not yet. The wounds were too fresh. Then I called my daughter, as promised. "Mom?" She sounded worried. "Where are you? Are you all right?" "I'm perfectly fine, Abigail," I answered calmly. "And I'm in Prescott. I suggest we meet at 3 o'clock this afternoon at Martha's Cafe." It wasn't a random choice of location. Martha's was a small but popular cafe in the center of town, always full of people. I didn't want to meet Abigail and Noel in a secluded place where they could pressure me without witnesses. "At a cafe?" Abigail sounded surprised. "But Mom, we need to have a serious talk. Wouldn't it be better at your house?" "I don't have the house you mean anymore," I said. "And yes, we do need to have a serious talk. 3 o'clock at Martha's. Come with Noel." I hung up without waiting for her answer. I wasn't interested in her objections or trying to control the situation. Now I was dictating terms. I had a few hours before the meeting, and I decided to use that time to visit my old house. I needed to pick up a few more personal items and, more importantly, say goodbye to the place that had been the center of my life for so many years. I hailed a cab again. The driver, an older man about my age, proved to be talkative. "Are you moving?" he asked, noticing my pensive look. "Yes," I replied. "After 40 years in the same house, I'm starting a new life." "That's a brave move," he nodded approvingly. I'd recently moved from a big house to a smaller apartment after my wife died. It was strange at first, but now I'm glad I made the move. Less worries, more freedom. His words cheered me up. I'm not the only one who decided to make a big change at an advanced age. My old house looked the same as it always had, a little dilapidated but full of character. I unlocked the door with my key and stepped inside, preparing myself for the memories to come flooding back. It didn't take long for them to come. Every room, every corner held the imprint of years gone by. I quickly gathered what I had come for: a few more photos, favorite books, a few memorabilia. It all fit into one small bag. It's amazing how little material things really matter at the end of life. Before I left, I stopped in the living room where Clive and I had spent so many evenings, where Abigail had grown up, where our family history had been made. "Goodbye, old friend," I said quietly to the house. "You have served us well." I arrived at Martha's Cafe 15 minutes before the appointed time. I chose a table in the center of the room, ordered tea, and prepared for the meeting. Abigail and Noel showed up at 3 o'clock sharp. They looked exhausted and irritable, clear signs that my disappearance had thrown them off balance. Abigail looked around nervously, apparently not expecting to see me in such a busy place. Noel was as alert as ever, his cold gaze scanning the room. I waved, and they quickly made their way to my table. "Mom!" Abigail tried to hug me, but I nodded demurely, pointing to the chairs across from me. "Sit down," I said calmly. "We have a lot to talk about." They sat down, exchanging quick glances. I could see them trying to assess the situation, to see how much I knew and how determined I was. "Ruth," Noel began in the professional tone he usually used to convince clients, "we were terribly worried. To disappear like this without warning—" "I left a note," I interrupted him. "And I called the police to let them know I was all right." "A note!" Abigail was indignant. "Left on an urgent matter? What kind of explanation is that? We thought something had happened to you." "That's not true." I looked her straight in the eye. "You weren't afraid for me, but for your plans. After you found my letter in the safe, you realized that I knew about your intention to send me to a nursing home and sell my house." Abigail cast a quick glance at the surrounding tables, clearly concerned that someone might hear our conversation. "Mom, you misunderstood," she began in a whisper. "We never planned—" "Don't lie to me, Abigail," I interrupted her again. "I heard you talking in the kitchen, word for word. I'm going to put my mother in a nursing home." "That's exactly what you said." Abigail's face paled, and Noel fidgeted in his chair. "It was just a conversation," he interjected. "A discussion of hypothetical scenarios. We would never have acted without your consent, Ruth. You contacted Sun Valley and spoke to a Simon," I parried. "You spread lies about my mental state, even to my sister Judith. That doesn't sound like discussing hypothetical scenarios." Abigail and Noelle exchanged glances again, but this time it was not just concern, but fear. They realized their game was up. We were acting in good faith, Abigail tried to defend herself, but her voice sounded unconvincing, even to herself. In the best interest of whom? I asked. For me or for your bank account? You were discussing selling my house and how quickly you needed to do it before prices dropped any further. You were talking about the house in Santa Barbara you wanted to buy with the money. That's not caring about me, Abigail. It's greed. Noel tried to take control of the situation. Look, Ruth, maybe we were too hasty in some of our decisions, but our intentions were… Your intentions were absolutely clear, I said firmly. And that's why I took certain steps to protect myself. I pulled a folder of documents out of my bag and placed it on the table. Here are copies of all the legal documents I've prepared over the last week. A new will that gives you, Abigail, a token amount of $1,000. A power of attorney in the event of incapacity that names my sister Judith, not you. Documents prohibiting me from being placed in any institution without my express consent and the opinion of at least 2 independent doctors. And finally, papers for the sale of my house, which would be finalized next week. Abigail looked like she'd been punched. Noel grabbed the folder and began frantically going through the documents. You can't do this, Abigail said in a shaky voice. This, it's perfectly legal, I finished for her. I've passed all the necessary mental health checks and 3 independent doctors have confirmed my full capacity, so yes, I can do it. And I did. Noel closed the folder and placed it on the table. His face was a mask of restrained anger. Ruth, you're making a huge mistake. This house is your old age insurance. Without it, I have enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my years, I said. I've been an accountant for 42 years and I know how to manage my finances. And the house you're so anxious to get, I'm selling to a young family with 3 children. They'll appreciate it like you never could. Where will you live? Abigail asked, still trying to comprehend what was happening. You can't just disappear. I already found an apartment, I said. It's small but cozy. It's perfect for my needs. No stairs, all on one level, safe neighborhood. And where is this apartment? Noel tried to speak calmly, but I could see the vein pulsing on his temple, a sure sign of restrained rage. I'm not telling you that. I shook my head. Not yet anyway. Maybe someday if you prove that I can trust you, but not now. Abigail looked confused, like a child whose favorite toy had been taken away. But you're my mother. We're family. You can't just cut us out of your life. I felt a sudden sadness. Despite everything that had happened, a part of me still loved my daughter. But I couldn't let that love blind me again. I'm not cutting you out of my life, Abigail. I'm setting boundaries. Boundaries that you must respect if you want to maintain any kind of relationship with me. I pulled another envelope from my bag and handed it to Abigail. Here is a letter in which I lay out these boundaries. 1. No talking about my house, money, or will. 2. No attempts to control my life or make decisions for me. 3. Honesty only. No manipulation, no lies. Abigail held the envelope as if it might bite her. What if we don't agree on these, boundaries? Then we won't see each other, I answered simply. It's your choice. Noel, still seething with anger, leaned across the table toward me. What about your responsibilities, Ruth? Do you think you can just walk away and live your life to your heart's content, leaving your daughter with nothing? I looked at him with pity. My responsibilities as a mother were to raise Abigail, to educate her, and to prepare her for life on her own. I had fulfilled those responsibilities years ago. Now my duty to myself was to live my remaining years with dignity and on my own terms. Abigail looked like she was about to cry, but I could see that her eyes remained dry. She'd always been able to use tears as a weapon, but now she realized it wouldn't work. You've thought of everything, she said with a tinge of bitterness. We don't even have anything to offer. You can offer what you should have been offering all along, I replied. Respect, honesty, real caring, not faking it for material gain. Noel snorted, clearly unimpressed by my words. For a man like him, material values were always more important than emotional ties. So what's next? He asked. Are you just going to disappear again? No, I shook my head. I'll live my life. See friends, travel, read books, Maybe even start writing my memoirs. I can call you from time to time if you honor my boundaries, but I will no longer allow you to control me or my life." Abigail looked lost, as if for the first time she was faced with a situation she couldn't manipulate in her favor. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said. "We're family." "Yes, we are family by blood," I agreed. "But over the past week, I've realized that true family isn't necessarily those who are related to you by blood. It's those who truly care about you, respect you, and want the best for you, even if it doesn't align with their own interests." I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "I have that kind of family, Pearl, Judith. Other friends who have supported me in my time of need. And if you want to be part of that family, you're going to have to prove yourself worthy of it." Noel stood up too, his face a mask of cold anger. "You'll regret this, Ruth," he said quietly. "When you get worse and really need care, you'll regret pushing away the only people who could take care of you." I smiled, unafraid of his threats. "No, Noel, I won't regret it, because I know that the care you offer has a price, and that price is my freedom and my dignity. I would rather die on my own than live under someone else's control." Abigail stood up slowly, still holding the envelope with my terms. "You'll change," she said, but there was no certainty in her voice. "You'll realize that we meant well." "Maybe," I replied. "Time will tell. But for now, I'll live my own way." I said goodbye with a brief nod and left the cafe. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. There was no regret, no guilt, just the clear realization that I had made the right choice. I walked down the familiar streets of Prescott toward my new apartment, enjoying the warm spring air. The city that had been my home for so many years now seemed different, more open, full of possibilities. At home, the first thing I did was call Pearl to tell her about the meeting. "Did they accept it?" she asked anxiously. "Not really," I laughed. Noel was furious and Abigail was shocked, but they realized I was serious. "So what's next?" Pearl's voice was full of curiosity. "I'm going to live from here," I answered simply. "Enjoying every day, traveling, reading the books I've always wanted to read, spending time with people who really appreciate me. Maybe even find a new hobby." "That sounds wonderful," Pearl agreed. "Yeah," I agreed. "And you know what's amazing? It took me 76 years to realize a simple truth. It's never too late to start living your own way." After my conversation with Pearl, I stepped out onto the small balcony of my new apartment. The sun was setting, coloring the sky with golden hues. I thought about the long journey that had brought me here, from a young wife and mother to an independent older woman ready to fight for her freedom and dignity. My relationship with Abigail and Noel would never be the same, and that was painful to realize. But I couldn't let that pain define the rest of my life. I deserved better. Better friends, better relationships, better treatment of myself. I watched the sunset and thought about Clive. What would he say if he saw me now? I could almost hear his laughter and his voice. "Well done, old girl. You've always been a fighter." And I knew it was true. I had always been a fighter. I just forgot that sometimes letting others decide for me what was best for my life. It won't happen again. 7 days of disappearing had taught me a lot, but the most important lesson was simple. My life belongs to me alone, and only I have the right to decide how to live it. I returned to my room as it started to get dark, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly calm. There was uncertainty ahead, but also freedom. Freedom to live by my own rules, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. A true family, not one bound by blood, but one bound by love and respect. And I finally found my true family.